Quick introduction. I'm the president and founder of Agilus. We are a highly specialized Agile technology consulting firm. We focus on only Agile and lean methodology and applying those to product development, Agile engineering, Agile transformation, and then coaching and training. I fortunately got introduced to Agile 20 years ago, working as a software engineer at IBM. My project lead talked about XP. I'd never heard of it, and we as a team decided to try it, and it was a huge success. And at that time, I didn't realize that was Agile, and since then have learned obviously much more. Eventually was introduced to Scrum in 2005, played the role of a Scrum Master and a project manager. Didn't know then, but that was not a great idea and not a good experience. And since then, I graduated to working with the teams, coaching them, and then doing enterprise level coaching. Started the company in 2013. Besides the work-related stuff, I'm quite an avid fan of soccer. I don't play as much, but I watch and follow soccer. I used to coach both my daughter's teams when they were playing soccer. And in 2019, I was fortunate to publish a book as a co-author. It's called The Lean Playbook. It is available on Amazon if you're interested. It talks about 16 different lean and agile techniques to use depending on a challenge or situation you're facing within your team or within your organization. And lastly, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, email, Twitter. Always love to connect and talk to people. So do not hesitate to do that. So while I'm about to begin the presentation, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. Dominic and Jamie have kindly offered to moderate that and interject and ask me questions. So what I'm going to talk about is business agility. It's a hot topic. Everybody talks about this. What I've found is, based on personal experience working with lots of different companies, very few companies are geared towards having good business agility or understand how to create agility within their organization. So let's begin by just talking about what is business agility. And if you have thoughts on this, feel free to put it on the chat window. People have different understanding and a belief of what constitutes agility. In my opinion, it's very simple. It is allowing the ability for an organization to change course and to adapt to their environment. And the current pandemic is a prime example. We are seeing organizations that truly have agility able to pivot and come out with new products or new services, whereas organizations that are rigid and lack that agility are struggling. So this is something that we can all see today. This is a very relevant and pertinent topic. And the reason we need agility is because of the simple fact that in today's environment, the pace at which there is a disruption means that if you're not able to adapt to the changing environment and the needs of the market and the customer, you will be disrupted. And this is very well known in today's marketplace. If you look at the list of Fortune 1000 companies, if you look back over the last 10 years, what is shocking is that 70% of the companies that were listed 10 years ago are not in the Fortune 1000 anymore. So this dynamic has caused disruption, and traditional, long-standing, well-respected companies that were thought to be rock solid with their business model have been completely disrupted. And just to mention a few, we can all think about Blockbuster as a good example, but there are several more. And towards the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk about 3 current examples of companies that have adopted very well in the current environment. So the question becomes, how do you attain business agility? Is there some secret sauce? Is there some secret process, methodology? And I will let you answer that question yourself when we get towards the end of the presentation. So let me move this bar to the bottom so it's a little bit less. So how do you attain business agility? And what I'm going to present is my belief that there are 5 key ingredients for business agility. Slack, I'm going to talk about this. All of you are project management practitioners, so you may think of Slack and may think of traditional Slack in terms of project management scheduling, but that's not what this is referring to, and we'll talk more about this. Dedicated teams, this is no surprise. Even though if you're not surprised by seeing this, you will be surprised to know that 90% of organizations don't have dedicated teams. Employee empowerment, and this again may seem very obvious, but very few organizations truly empower their employees. And this plays a key role in agility within the organization. The 4th element is trust and safety. And this has a lot to do with how the organization and the people in the organization are willing to take risk and adapt to changing environment. And the last one is a learning organization. So these are the 5 things I'm going to walk through and talk about in detail. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to post it in the chat window. Okay, I'm just take a quick pause here and then we'll continue. So what is Slack? So Slack is basically the capacity of within an organization to change, to provide that room to pivot and adapt to a given environment. And if you're wondering why this is critical, I highly recommend reading a book by Tom DeMarco called Slack. This is a book that I buy and give to managers in organizations that we work for. It provides very insightful information about what is the importance of having Slack within an organization and within teams. So if I were to think about this and present it from the perspective of, it's the capacity that you set aside for long-term efficiency and long-term agility. And I'll give you an example. FedEx has at any given moment 2 planes that are available and operational, so that if there is any plane that at any city has any technical problem and it cannot fly, they can divert one of these 2 planes to that city. And these 2 planes are always fully staffed, fully operational, and if I am not mistaken, they are actually airborne at any given time, one over the East Coast and one over the West Coast. Now, one could think of this as waste. We're wasting money, we're wasting the crew, we're wasting fuel. But for them, it is the key element that determines their success of the business model. Any delay in delivery of a package is going to hurt their not only the bottom line, but their reputation as a reliable courier. So that's an example of operational capacity that is built in for long-term health and agility of the organization. The other example that I would cite is when we see a puzzle like this, there's a reason that there is one small square that is left open. That allows us to move the pieces on this board. If we stack this full to capacity, the ability to move around and to make changes becomes difficult. It's like a highway. A highway works best when it is at a certain capacity. If it is at 100% capacity, that's DC beltway traffic. So the reason for having slack is to allow for flow of value within the organization and the ability to change direction and to pivot if the circumstances ask for. Okay. Jamie and Dominic, I'm going to stop looking at the chat window. I'll let you moderate that so there is no distraction. And here is the other key piece, which is, and this is very counterintuitive, the more efficient we become, the less agility you have. And as I said, this is very, very counterintuitive. Often we strive for so much efficiency, the problem becomes the more efficient you get, the harder it is to change. It's like in the Agile world, we talk about having T-shaped team members. You don't want specialized specialists, you want generalists who are T-shaped. And that's the same thought process of an organization where your processes need to be less than 100% efficient so that it doesn't become so hard to change. This is all related to Slack. And the key here is to be able to do this well, you have to cut out stuff that doesn't provide any value. There's no point making things efficient when it provides no value. And it goes back to one of the key Agile principles where you focus on value delivery. Highest priority is to deliver value as quickly as possible. All right. Again, if you have questions, please post it on the chat window, and I'll let Dominic or Jamie ask those questions. So what happens when you have Slack? It increases agility. It gives your team members breathing room. If you are 100% loaded, there is no time to rest. There's no time to breathe. There's no time to be creative. And when there is lack of creativity and lack of thinking of problems, you cannot innovate. If you're always executing, you're not creating any new, generating new ideas and innovating on what the company could offer. When you have Slack, you also have the ability to take some risks and to experiment. And this is a key ingredient for innovation. So the next, I'm going to talk about dedicated teams. Like I mentioned earlier in the beginning, we all know about the importance of dedicated teams. Often it's very rare to find organizations that have dedicated teams. And here, when I talk about dedicated teams, I'm talking about, it doesn't matter whether you produce software or you are in or Uber or Netflix or a government contractor. Create a dedicated team to accomplish a certain vision and mission and goal. And that's what makes it successful rather than having silos and having functional teams rather than cross-functional teams. So anybody here want to guess what is one of the biggest disadvantages when you don't have 100% dedicated teams? Feel free to please again post on the chat window. There are some huge consequences that are never measured and are hard to see when there are no dedicated teams. And as I said, if you have any thoughts or want to venture a guess, please do so. The other problem becomes is when you don't have dedicated teams, the general tendency becomes to look at team members as resources rather than people. And when you look at your team members as resources, the biggest mindset that develops is that resources can be moved around, they're expendable, they're fungible, and they're not people who are empowered to accomplish great things. And that's the other consequence of having fungible, not having dedicated teams. The other thing that happens implicitly is when you don't have dedicated teams, those team members are multitasking. And we all know the consequences of multitasking. I actually am suffering from consequences of being a super multitasker. The reason my Twitter handle says Super Manjit is because my colleagues would joke with me because I could multitask and could easily be considered as a champion of multitasking. So they gave me the nickname Super Manjit. At that time, it was funny and it was humorous and I took pride in it, but I'm suffering the consequences now where because of multitasking, my ability and to have retention of in my short-term memory is very bad. And that's a consequence of constantly multitasking through various things at any given moment. And that's what happens in the real world and in organizations where people are not dedicated and they're multitasking because that's what's expected. There is no other way to succeed. There is no other way to demonstrate your productiveness. So this culture of multitasking then becomes the de facto norm. And so the more we lean and strive towards dedicated teams, the easier it becomes to be successful with having business agility. Because this team then can be quickly said, hey, your new mission and goal is to do this. And that's what allows the entire team to shift their focus and energy. Okay. The third element is employee empowerment. And this is important because often in a lot of organizations, it's the process that drives everything. And I'm not suggesting that process is not needed. The key is to find the right balance, to have enough processes to keep the train on the track, but not have so many processes that prescribes to the minute detail everything that needs to be done within the organization. Because when you do that, you're killing creativity and innovation that your people can bring to the work that they're doing. And a process then becomes what is then guarded, and it's a process that drives everything. If it's not part of the process, things that are like exceptions are immediately discouraged. And the best way to handle this is to let the individual team design their process and come up with the most efficient way to get the work done. And if that is something that really works well, other teams will automatically replicate it. And it becomes an organic way to spread a certain practice and a certain process, which is coming from the ground up rather than is coming from top down. The other reason why this is important is because knowledge work requires creativity and having few rules. It's like telling a painter and giving them a lot of rules on how they can paint. You're going to kill the creativity of the painter. So the less guardrails we have, the more creativity the team members will be able to demonstrate in their work. Trust and safety. I'm going to take a quick peek, see if there's any messages here that I should be looking at. So I may come back to these questions at the end. Is that okay, or do you want me to, any preference of addressing these now?
We can come back to them at the end.
Okay, sounds good. Sorry. So trust and safety. And again, this is something we all hear about it, we talk about it. Very few organizations truly practice this in its true spirit. If there is harsh repercussions for failing, nobody is going to take a chance or is going to experiment. There is going to be very little innovation. But if failure is accepted and failure is celebrated, and again, that is counterintuitive. The reason failure should be celebrated because it tells you what not to do the next time. It tells you what not to do next time. And that is a critical component of learning and improving on what you're doing. It's the concept of iterating through your hypothesis and experimenting with what we want to accomplish. Very rarely is the final goal achieved without some experimentation and trial and error. So to handle trust and safety, the key element is to encourage it as your team members demonstrate their ability to handle more trust, responsibilities, failure, you increase that level of trust. And you give them that responsibility. And what I have noticed is that people then become super sensitive to the decisions that they're making and the actions they're taking. Not because they are being scrutinized, but it's more because the responsibility now weighs heavily on every decision. So they're more conscientious about the choices and decisions that they're making within their teams or within their level of authorization. And as you build this level of trust and this safety for failure, you will start to see some amazing things emerge when teams experiment and come up with new solutions for problems that the team may be encountering. The last piece here talks about a learning organization. And just like some of the other elements, often we talk about this, we hear about it, we read about it. I wonder how many of us have actually seen an organization truly live to the spirit of being a learning organization. And what this entails is for the organization, from its entire management to down to the frontline teams, taking the time to pause and reflect on what they've learned and what they would do differently the next time. So it's not a typical lessons learned, but it's a action-oriented retrospective of what worked well, what should be improved, and then immediately putting it into practice. If you're not putting it into practice, that learning will be lost. So having a retrospective at all levels of an organization is how you create a culture of learning and continuous improvement. And that eventually helps transform the organization into a culture of learning and constantly improving. And this then starts to pervade all aspects of the organization, whether it is the leadership, the culture, the physical space and the physical work, your internal processes, the human capital and the talent, and all the work that goes into that human capital. All of that then starts orienting and revolving around this spirit of continuously learning and continuously improving. Because the work is never done, you have to continuously improve. And here I would use a very well-known example of Toyota, where they don't strive for perfection, they strive for excellence. And they're continuously improving. The anecdote that I would share that I read was a manager in a Toyota assembly line in one of their factories went to his supervisor and said, during the regular meeting, said, everything is good. I have no problems, no issues, nothing to change. His supervisor took him to the floor, to the factory floor, made him stand in a place where he could see the entire floor, drew a circle using a chalk, and told him to stand there, and told him to not step out of the circle until he has observed something that can be improved. And that's an example of a spirit of continuous improvement and learning. And that's a true story of how Toyota approaches its internal culture of work and improving on a continuous basis. So in this current environment, business agility is truly a need to survive. If you're not able to develop this internal muscle of business agility within your organization, your ability to withstand the current change is going to be extremely, extremely difficult, and the survival of the organization is at stake. And here are a couple of quick examples, and this is from the most recent Harvard Business Review. You can find this article online on their website. So Dyson, the manufacturer of vacuum cleaners and hand dryers and other products, they designed a ventilator in 10 days. Where the world has been struggling to find and source ventilators, they designed a new ventilator in 10 days. Here's another example about Alibaba teaming up with another company to build a 100% unmanned store. So you're not in contact with any other person. When you visit this store, it's entirely unmanned for all essential supplies and items. And this is an innovation that they've done in the last few weeks. And here is one which is more close to home, hopefully for all of us, Chick-fil-A. They went through several iterations of coming up with a process for their drive-through so that it is safe and is efficient. And I can vouch for this personally myself. I have been to the Chick-fil-A drive-through maybe 3 or 4 times in the last several weeks. And it's truly amazing how quickly they get you through this drive-through. From arriving at their station to placing an order to picking it up, paying for it, and being out in maybe 5 to 7 minutes. At least that's been my experience. And this has all evolved over the last few weeks once the COVID-19 restrictions came in place. So these are all examples of our businesses or organizations that have agility and have been able to adapt and respond to the current environment. So I'm going to pause here, and this is a good time to shift to looking at your questions.
I think to kick things off, if I can start, we had a previous speaker talking about dedicated teams. We had a previous speaker who he saw the number of projects happening in the future decreasing, and the number of product teams increasing. So kind of the same concept of fewer projects, more dedicated teams around a product, not necessarily an external product like like Uber or Netflix, but even like internal products like your HR system or your accounting system. Do you see the same trend of kind of fewer matrixed cross-functional projects and more product teams?
Absolutely. And interestingly, some federal agencies have picked up on this. So by the way, what you're defining and describing, Dominic, is something that the commercial world and the tech industry has been doing for the last 20 years. They only have product teams. They don't have cross-matrix teams. And finally, it's the federal government and other organizations are picking up on this well-proven structure of having product lines and teams that work on that one individual product. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, and I saw the same thing. I worked at Microsoft for 8 or 9 years, and they have very few project teams. Everything, like you said, everything revolves around a product.
Correct.
Another question that came up is how do businesses measure or know when they have their agility?
You don't. You can't measure it. You can only feel it. You can only see it. And that's a part. So I don't want to make this statement, and I'm going to be very assertive and kind of very generic. There is a big obsession with measuring stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is, first you have to be mindful of why you're measuring it and for what purpose, because measures can be gamed very easily. What you have to look at, there are very few measures that really provide value. Most don't. What you have to do is you have to feel it, you have to sense it, and you can't measure that, right? It's like asking somebody, how much do you like me, or how much do you love me? How can you measure that? You feel it. And everybody in the organization has to feel it. And I've worked with organizations where you can just feel it. The moment you step into the facility, the vibe is just different. The way people interact, the way people, the attitude and the mental frame is just different. And there is no measure for it. The way you measure it is the outcome. So I'll give you an example. If a challenge comes up, the examples that I was showing here, the examples that come up, if an organization can do something like this, that tells you have agility. If you cannot do something like this in an environment like today, that's your true measure.
And another question about the environment today. With COVID, how do you think the Agile has changed?
So personally, I haven't seen a lot of changes. Honestly, what I've seen is the challenge is more around managing things virtually. So as you know, Agile is a big proponent of co-location and physically being together, and making that shift to emulate that virtual co-location is what organizations and Agile coaches and Scrum Masters are struggling with. Within our company, we have been able to successfully transition that into a virtual environment very well. And in fact, I've noticed we are actually collaborating and communicating better than when we were doing it when we were physically together. It's a little bit odd. It could also be a temporary phase, I don't know. But at this point, we are seeing that it's actually working better when everybody is virtual. So I think the challenge is to understand how do you facilitate things when everybody is virtual. And this is where I highly recommend learning facilitation skills. That helps even when you're physically together, but it is more critical when you're virtually doing all the work virtually.
A follow-up question on that. For your company, do you use specific tools to help with the communication? Do you, like Microsoft Teams or Slack or Basecamp, do you use tools that have kind of reinforce the communication channels?
So we use some of those tools. We also use a couple of other similar tools, and we let the teams decide what works best for them. So we don't dictate. We will share what one team is doing, and if the other team likes it, they will adopt it, or they will take pieces of it, or just come up with their own. We don't dictate that. What we have found is teams are using their own techniques. So we use something called GroupMe, which is a group SMS tool that works really well. We're using Trello. We're using another tool that we discovered recently called Same Page. So again, everybody's experimenting, and we try something, and we then, if we like it, we stick with it. Otherwise, we pivot. There's no reason to be kind of anchored to the certain tool if it's not serving your needs.
As far as Slack, is there certain positions that you can implement Slack versus that it's more difficult to implement Slack in companies?
It is more difficult because I think somebody wrote a comment here. It's difficult because often managers are trying to optimize the utilization of their employees, right? I remember when I was working for another company as a project manager and was working on a federal contract, we needed to have 92% billable rate. So how much time does that leave me to be creative and think about challenges and problems that I'm facing or my team is facing or my organization is facing, right? This is why we have all heard about examples of Google, and I don't know if they're still doing this, but they used to give one whole day to their teams to do work, to do whatever work they want, which is that they're passionate about. Same thing with Atlassian. A lot of the things that have come out of Atlassian has been because they had this hackathon day that employees could hack and work on whatever they want. So they're not obsessed with 100% utilization of the employees. They're thinking about the growth and health and agility of the team and the organization. So I'll give you one practical example. When we do so we use Scrum quite a bit. For a lot of our clients use Scrum. So when we do our sprint planning, we set aside 10% as Slack. That 10% is not considered as a buffer, is not considered as a padding. It's 10% to leave for any unplanned activity, challenges, opportunities that may come up. If you don't have that, that opportunity will just go by because you don't have time to react and respond to it.
Do you base the 10% on a 40-hour work week? In other words, so you only plan on 36 hours?
That is correct.
Okay. I've seen other organizations use 32 hours or even once 30 hours as their kind of their planning baseline.
And that's whatever works for you. So again, I always suggest experiment. I'm a big believer in experimenting. If you think you know the answer right off the bat, you probably don't. So so experiment. If 4 hours is not enough, go to 6, go to 8, go to 10, come back to 4. So experiment.
How do you convince management that, hey, we're going to go ahead and only work the people 30 hours, 36 hours a week? I mean, what's the selling point to that?
The selling point is very simple. Have you tried to use a vacuum cleaner and keep it running for 5 hours? What would happen?
I haven't tried that.
It's probably going to burn out.
Oh, it will. Okay.
or any other whether it's a dishwasher or whether it's a I don't know a mixer grinder, you got to pause. You got to let it breathe. It's the same thing. You have to have some time for people to decompress, to think about creative ideas and solutions. There is a reason why often we get the most brightest ideas when we are showering. It's not because there is some magic in water. It is because we are more relaxed. So the moment you're relaxed, that's when these ideas which are there in your unconscious, they emerge. And if you want those ideas to come from your team, you have to give them that time to slow down and breathe and be just relaxed.
That's a good point. You made a comment about multitasking and short-term memory. Is there actually a correlation to?
Yes, there is. You can find research. If you Google it, you'll find research which says multitasking actually affects your short-term memory.
Is that permanent or is that temporary?
In my case, it seems to be permanent. I'm serious. In my case, It seems to be permanent. Yes.
Wow.
I did not know that.
I was reminded of when you started off with Slack, it really aligns to one of the Agile principles of sustainable pace, right? Maintaining a sustainable pace. I feel like some organizations that work their people 110% of the time, there's no Slack, there's no time for creativity, no time for innovation, that they treat every project like a sprint versus a marathon, and therefore people burn out, they make more mistakes, they become less productive. So I definitely see Slack as tied together with the concept of the principle of sustainable pace.
But there is a reason, there is a more root cause for this, Dominic. Can you think of what could be a more root cause, the actual root cause of why that happens?
Fear, maybe risk.
No, the root cause is whether it's a project or it's a product, the stakeholders or the leadership are given a date for its delivery right on the outset.
Right, good point.
And when you do that, your understanding of that project or that effort is very minimal. If you think about this, if you think about the days when in the United States, the West was unexplored. And if you're going to decide, hey, I'm going to go from the East Coast to the West Coast and I'm going to get there in 10 days. You've never made that journey before. You have no idea of the terrain. You have no idea of weather. How can you predict you will get there in 10 days? That's the same mindset you have to apply when you start a product development effort. The moment you make a commitment, that sets in stone, that date that is set in stone, often right at the outset, has a ripple effect. And then even if you've planned your team to have that slack, soon it's out of the window because, hey, we made a commitment, we got to deliver, we got to meet that deadline.
How much have we hurt ourselves though? Because we've trained senior executive about the triple constraint. We've trained them to believe in scope, schedule, and budget. So like you said, we've spent a lot of our energy convincing other people that schedule is maybe it's not the number one most important thing, but we've always put it up in the top 3. So do you think we've really hurt ourselves and that is now making it difficult for us to convince them, no, actually more important than schedule is delivering value, delivering positive
That's
value.
right. And that's the reason why a lot of organizations are struggling to make this transition. Because that golden, the iron triangle of cost, schedule, and scope is so deeply ingrained that it's very hard to unlearn it and kind of unhinge it from its impact on our work culture and the work mindset. So if you focus on value delivery, then you're so liberated and you take such a different way of handling things that I didn't realize this until many years ago when I first kind of experienced it myself. It was the most liberating way to work and to look at things.
You talked about
Jamie, maybe one more question, Jamie.
Yep, you talked about celebrating failure. So how do you celebrate failure without harming trust? I mean, how do you churn that so that it's a good thing?
So the thing is, one, you have to realize that if people are making good faith effort, then if that failure is coming out of good faith effort, you celebrate it. So for example, there is a challenge or a problem and somebody comes up with a solution. Well, it didn't work, but they tried. So you celebrate that failure because now well, this approach won't work. Let's go look for something else, right? So there's a famous quote that I use. So when Thomas Edison at a press conference unveiled the light bulb, some of you may have heard about this. A reporter asked at the press conference, looks like you wasted a lot of time because you went through, anybody know how many attempts you went through to create the light bulb? Any guesses?
5,000.
Hundreds.
12,000. 12,000.
12,000, yeah.
So the reporter said, looks like you wasted a lot of time going through these 12,000 ways to create this light bulb. And he said, no, I actually now know 12,000 ways not to make a light bulb.
That's right.
Right? You can't get to that end point until you have gone through these iterations. The problem is we are so trained that, hey, if you don't succeed the first time, you're a failure. But it's not a failure, it's an experiment. It's a learning opportunity. It's like riding a bike. When you put a child on the bike for the first time, they're going to fall. Are you going to say, oh, you're a failure, you never get to ride a bike again? Sorry. You don't do that. You put them back on it and you say, let's try again. Let's try again. Let's try again. Same thing.
All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up. First, thank you very much, Manjit. Fantastic presentation. A lot of good examples. Also very recent, the Harvard Business Review examples. That'll give me a couple of things to follow up on here this afternoon. Everyone, thank you for joining us. For those of you that have attended today, 54 people, thanks for attending. I'll send you an email out here in a couple of minutes that includes the link. So if you want to join us this afternoon at 4 o'clock to further the discussion, I look forward to seeing and hearing you. If not, I look forward to seeing everybody next week. Everybody have a great week. Stay safe out there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Jamie.
All
Thank
right,
you, everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
stay safe. Thank you.